Aloha, mahalo to everyone for joining us. My name is Chris Barsman. I'm the president of the Sustainable Tourism Association of Hawaii, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you today to our 2020 Sustainable Tourism Hālāwai, or annual meeting. In a normal year, we'd be gathering in one of the beautiful hotel spaces in Waikiki and celebrating the accomplishments of our tour operators, tour guides, and travel writers. However, 2020 is clearly not a normal year. Nevertheless, the board of the association thought it would be best to hold an event and simply adapt it to these times. So thank you for all joining us virtually so that we can continue to spread the message of Kokua, Malama, and Pono travel. We have a great lineup for you here today. We have the honor of welcoming Anna Pollock, founder of Conscious Travel. We'll also be hearing from Joel Guy, Executive Director for the Hanalei Institute, and also we'll be hearing from Kalani Kaʻanāʻanā, Director of Hawaiian Cultural Affairs and Natural Resources for the Hawaii Tourism Authority. As with any good conference, there are a couple of housekeeping issues that we do need to take care of. Typically, this is where I would direct you to the bathrooms and validation, but I'm assuming, given the virtual nature, that you all have that taken care of. But specific to this virtual meeting, wanted to let you know that this meeting is being recorded. We know this is happening during the middle of the workday, so for those of you that need to come in and out, we will have it available for you on our website and our YouTube page. Also, throughout the meeting, we will be doing some virtual polls. They should be popping up on your screen automatically. We do highly encourage everyone to participate, and that way we can just find out a little bit more about what we're doing right and how we can make this a better presentation for you. And finally, we will be conducting question and answer at the very end of the presentation. If you can just do us a favor, type your questions into the question and answer box, and our team will pull those questions together and have them ready for that portion of the programming. And then finally, chat has been disabled to allow everyone to really focus on the speakers and hear some of the great messaging that's there. But throughout my portion of the presentation, we will be dropping a few links into our chat box so that you can find out more about some of the different topics that I might be bringing up. But before we get too much deep into everything, as always, we really like to start things off on the right foot with an Oli Aloha. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Monty McComber, Cultural Director for the Royal Hawaiian Center. Monty, thank you so much for being here today. The floor is yours.
Mahalo. I'd like to open up with an Oli from Auntie Edith McKenzie to Hea to gather our thoughts and our na'au as we move forward with today's session. He ho'omalu kākou. Ano ai ko kākou mau kupuna la ea. A me na mea hano. Ke ho'o hiwa ia nei ma kou la ea. E hui pui ka vai. O ko kākou mau kupuna la ea. Ia hi'i pu ia kākou I ka lokahi. Ka nalu I mia kākou mai ka hiki mai la ea. Me ke aloha no kākou pau. Me ke aloha no kākou pau. Aloha pumihana kākou e nā hoa aloha mai ka o ili mo na kala I kumukahi a kala I hoa o ka mole olo hua. Aloha mai kākou. And looking forward to getting things started and turning it back over to you, Chris.
Aloha, Monty. That was beautiful, and that's a wonderful way for us to start our day. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us and greet us that way. For those of you that this is your first time attending this, Hālāwai is our annual meeting. So before we get to the speakers, I just want to give a little bit of background and talk about some of the work that the organization has done and the incredible team of volunteer board members and staff and the many accomplishments that we've been able to achieve throughout the year. First, I just want to talk a little bit about our mission. The Sustainable Tourism Association is here to protect Hawaii's unique and natural environment, as well as host culture through the promotion of responsible travel and education programs relating to sustainable tourism for residents, businesses, and visitors alike. So we use this mission statement as what we do to guide us forward And so hopefully you'll see through some of the actions that we've taken through the year that we've really embraced this. The first thing I want to do is recognize the board members. But before actually I recognize the board members asked me to first recognize all of the past board members as well as some of our past advisors. We recognize that as a board, we stand on the shoulders of those thought leaders that blaze the trail for us. I don't think we would have thought 20 years ago or 25 years ago when this organization started, we'd be having a virtual meeting talking about regenerative and sustainable tourism with over 100 registered attendees. It's truly a testament to the work that they did, and we are eternally grateful to all of you. So for those of you that are on today, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with all of you, and thanks for the trail that you've blazed for us. It's also my sincere pleasure and honor to introduce you to the 2020 slate of board of directors. They're honestly some of the most passionate and dedicated professionals that I've had the honor to collaborate with, and they've truly made the organization both stronger and have helped grow me personally. And so I'm just really thankful to all of them. So first, I just want to introduce Jun Matsumoto, our vice president. We also have Dan Lochtenberg. He's serving as our treasurer. We have Jamie Tokuno. She's serving as our secretary. Rounding out the slate of directors, we have Andy Carey. We also have Chandra Birch representing the island of Kauai. We have Leah Souza over on Oahu. Jeremiah Filson also on Kauai. Lila Jones on Maui. Michael Bell over on the island of Hawaii. And Stephanie Mock here on Oahu. And then, of course, a lot of the work that we've done has been through the board's direction, but really executed by the contractors that have really helped us get us there. So I also really want to send a big mahalo and thank you to Cheryl King and Kim Nichols. Cheryl is our administrative assistant and Kim is our program manager. Now, while they technically are both titles, they also they just do everything. And they're amazing and they're dedicated. And we're so fortunate to be working with them as well as the board. So again, I just want to say a huge mahalo to everyone and thank you for all your energy, time that you've put in. For those of you that are still with me, thank you. I know, get to Anna already. That's why you're all here. And I promise we will get there. But before we do get there, we do want to hear a little bit about our audience. So we're going to be posting a poll. It should be popping up on your screen in a few seconds here. It's just a few questions to let us know a little bit about who you are, where you're located. Should have popped up on your screen. Please do answer that. While you're answering, I just want to go through and highlight a few of the outcomes or a few of the key events that we had this year. This annual Hālāwai is our annual meeting. And as a nonprofit organization that is fully funded through donations and grants, we're able to do this work proudly because of these generous donations. And so we like to use this annual Hālāwai to kind of highlight some of the key projects that we've been doing throughout the year to show the impact that those donations and grants have had. And I'll be honest with you, we all know 2020 has been a really tough year for everyone, particularly for the tourism sector. But despite those obstacles, the challenges, the constant changes that we've all faced, this team has really kept pushing forward and really created some really impactful things despite all the challenges that 2020 has put forth. So I hope as I share that you all are as impressed as I was once I finally put together this full list that we've done. So the first thing I would like to share is about our certification program. And our tour operator certification program is now an internationally recognized, has internationally recognized accreditation of our certification standards. We teamed up with Travelife, who is a partner with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, formerly kind of part of the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Again, a lot of words, a lot of acronyms, but what does that mean? That basically means that we took our checklist, We submitted it to an international board to have them look and say, is this meaningful? Is the process good? Is this greenwashing, or is this a real certification program? And we got accredited, and they said, yes, it is. And we're able to partner with it. One of the other things that I'm very proud of also that's come out of this is we've done some workforce development. So we were able to host an auditor training. We now have 5 auditors trained in the state of Hawaii. And the reason why that's really important is previously, to get certification on an international level, you'd have to fly auditors in either from the mainland or maybe parts of Europe, which obviously adds a ton of cost to getting certified for our local companies. So because we were able to team up, do auditor training, we now have those resources on island, and they're spread out throughout the islands to help bring down that cost so that people can go and get certified. And there's local professionals that are able to conduct those audits. So that's something that I'm extremely proud of and really grateful that we were able to accomplish this year. The next thing I want to highlight is that we were awarded from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration a grant. And this grant is to work with them over the next few years to help team up with them on their Dolphin Smart program, to kind of talk about some of the challenges of the spinner dolphin programs that are around the island. And so our portion is we're going to be working with them to help develop training modules so that tour operators can have the proper training. And that we'll also be trying to have, that's perfect. As you'll see, some of the links are starting to get dropped. But the Dolphin Smart program is a really awesome program. We'll be putting together some training modules, and we'll also be doing some partnering with NOAA to help educate people around the program, why it's important, and hopefully really have an impact in some of the natural resources that we have. Okay, bear with me. This picture was taken pre-COVID, I promise. But this is another thing that we were very, very proud of, and we got off to a great start, is we conducted a number of trainings throughout the islands. This one right here you're seeing is on the island of Hawaii with some of the staff of Kualoa Ranch. We also conducted another one in February with Hoku Hawaii Tours, training their staff. A little bit later in the month, we went over to the island of Kauai. We worked with Holo Holo Charters and Kauai Hiking Tours, trained about 35 folks about good best practices for engaging in tours and protecting the natural resources. And we were also be able to put a lot of these onto our training platform, which I'll go into a little bit more. But obviously we had plans to actually do maybe 6 or 8 more trainings throughout the year, but COVID happened. And so we've had to adapt and move some of these things to more of an online platform, and we're adapting with that as we go. But one of the things I'm really proud of is the partnerships that we've really been able to foster and strengthen, even despite the challenges of 2020. So with the Hawaii Tourism Authority, we had a grant in 2019 that wrapped up in 2020, the early part of Q1 of 2020. And we're eternally grateful to the Hawaii Tourism Authority for the support that they've given us over the course of many years, and 2019 in particular, because it gave us the financial footing and gave us the opportunity to be able to manage through this COVID crisis and be able to continue to function and keep pushing forward with some of our programs. So that partnership has been really good for us. We also were able to partner with the Hawaii Visitors and Conventions Bureau. We hosted an in-person workshop back in February with about 15 people, but also about 45 online participants. We've also teamed up with HVCB to be a part of some of their sustainability committees. In addition to those partnerships, through some of the trainings that we've put together, we teamed up with the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, the University of Hawaii Hilo, and then every year we always try to do outreach to different groups all around the world. We had an opportunity to meet with some students and some faculty from Shinshu University in Japan. Again, this was pre-COVID, but it was done at the University of Hawaii, and it was a great opportunity to share and to be able to collaborate. Another thing that we're very proud of is we've been starting to put together a lot of infographics that tour operators, people in the visitor industry can just take, use, share with people to help visitors understand the best way to interact with Hawaii and our island home. Last year, we put together the Resafe sunscreen infographics that you probably are pretty familiar with. And then this year, we put together our Travel Pono infographic with the top 10 ways to travel Pono. Now, this was, again, put together pre-COVID, so there's none of the masking or any of those things put in there. But nevertheless, I think that these are still fantastic points, still all very valid. And for any of you that are interested in sharing this with other folks or visitors or anything like that, please feel free to steal this from us. We created this for it to be shared with others and to be distributed. That's what we do, is we try to help create resources for people along the way. Speaking of resources, we also have a new training platform. It's called Teachable. As you might be able to see on my screen, it's sustainabletourismhawaii.teachable.com. We'll be dropping the link in the chat in just a second here. And we have about 6 courses already loaded onto the platform. We're hoping to develop a number of other ones. And what's really awesome about this platform is we're able to take some of the trainings that we've done, the Resafe sunscreen trainings, sustainability for tourism businesses. We've been able to record them and post them up on the web. And what this has allowed for is, one of the challenges that we've heard the most from many of the tour operators that we work with is that they care about sustainability. They want to engage in sustainability, but they don't have the resources. A lot of them are mom and pop operators, and they're busy trying to make everything run. So what we've done is we've tried to put together resources that we can give these tour operators and be able to have them be able to share that with their employees, so that their employees can take these trainings in their free time, or maybe as a paid training, but not something that the owner themselves had to develop. And with that, it's a really great opportunity for all of their staff to be trained on some of these ideas, and then hopefully share that with the visitors that come to the islands. And ideally, in a perfect world, share what traveling Pono means once they go home, back to their home destinations. And then finally, the last highlight that I really want to highlight is very COVID specific, but it's our partnership with the World Travel and Tourism Council and their travel safe protocols, as well as Travelife again and their COVID-19 training. So the World Travel and Tourism Council has put together safe travel protocols. They're for many different sectors of the tourism industry. And it's basically best practices to help mitigate the spread of COVID in the various sectors. We really liked what they did, but we wanted to strengthen it slightly. So what we did was we teamed up with Travelife, who had created a COVID-19 resiliency training. And through their training platform, there's 10 modules. It takes about 2 hours to complete, so it's pretty in-depth, but it's really good. As you can see, the modules are on the screen. It's about really understanding the virus. How do you manage it in the workplace? How do you manage it in your food centers? How do you manage it in attractions? How do you do reputation management if there is an outbreak, and deal with some of those things? All things that are extremely critical to our industry. And so these trainings, I think, are incredibly powerful. And what we did is we tied it, if a tour operator goes in, completes the trainings through the Travelife platform, then we are able to give them that that Safe Travels logo that they can put on their website. I do just want to call out our Safe Travel logo not only has the World Travel and Tourism Council's logo on there, but you'll also see our logo on there. So if you see anyone with our logo on there, you know that they've gone through that training and have really engaged in the process of making sure that we're trying to do our best to just layer up those safety measures to keep the residents of Hawaii safe as we reopen to tourism. And so now, this is the part of the program where I really just get to say, I am so grateful for the board, for the people and the staff that have done so much to help us still be able to accomplish so much in a year that's been really challenging for all of us. And so now I come to the awkward part where we talk about asking for your humble support of our organization. We will be dropping a link in the chat to our 25th anniversary donation page. Next year, we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary. And so we've set for ourselves a pretty ambitious goal of trying to raise $25,000. And we're pretty sure that through community support, we'll be able to get there. We do want to recognize that 2020 has been difficult for many in our industry, and many folks in the industry have had their jobs impacted by the COVID pandemic. So if financially this isn't an option for you, or if you'd prefer to donate time, please do reach out to us through our website or our social media channels. We're, as a volunteer nonprofit organization, we are constantly looking for good, dedicated individuals that are passionate about creating a more sustainable future for Hawaii through hospitality and aloha. Now, thank you for listening to all of that with me. Please, if you have the means, we do have some poll results to share. It looks like they should have popped up on your screen. Looks like we have a pretty healthy representation. I'm showing right now that we have over 100 participants on the call right now. So again, just absolutely fantastic that there's this much interest in the topic. Looks like we have a lot of our folks coming in from Oahu, a number of folks coming in from Kauai, as well as some visitors from outside the US and some from the mainland. So, a lot of folks from the accommodation section, some folks, about a quarter of folks not even involved directly with tourism at all. And then about a third of our group is tour operator staff. I'm proud to say about 70% of the people on this call knew about us beforehand, and there's 30% who have not. Hopefully we were able to impress you with some of the wonderful things that we've done. And we thank you so much for joining us. But enough about me, on to the good stuff. Enough about the organization. It's my great pleasure to introduce Anna Pollock. She's the founder of Conscious Travel. She's spent over 45 years in the tourism industry and has advised just about every tourism board that's out there, including the European Union. I know that she's worked with the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Some of her most recent projects include working on the Core Tourism Futures Task Force for New Zealand as they start to reconsider what reopening tourism looks like in a post-COVID world, as well as working with Visit Flanders and their Travel to Tomorrow program, which is helping them shift their mindset from a volume growth model to a destination flourishing model, which obviously has a lot of ties to what we're looking at and considering here in Hawaii. So I think that's going to be really great. Some words that have been tied to Anna is that she's a sense maker. She's a really great communicator. She's a catalyst for change. And she really has a knack to kind of dive beneath the surface and really look deeply at questions and help find solutions that maybe have been right in front of our eyes, but never looked at with those fresh set of eyes. She's been a keynote speaker for the United Nations World Tourism Organization, PATA, ADA, HEDNA, you name it, she's been there. We are so grateful. We are so lucky to have her here. So it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Anna Pollock. Anna, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I'm delighted to be here. I guess the next thing I need to do is share my screen, yeah?
Yes, please.
Hello, everybody. Here we go. Well, good morning. I've got my stopwatch geared right next to me. I hope it will stay visible. It's wonderful to be with you, and I'm so impressed listening to all the things that you've managed to achieve in this very difficult year. I've been asked to talk about regenerative tourism, which is a very new and unfortunately a somewhat complex subject. I've negotiated for 25 minutes, and I'll do my absolute level best to stay well within that. And it occurred to me that if it was this time last year, we'd be talking about over tourism. So just how fast can the world change? This year, unfortunately, we have a different picture, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this horrible graph. But it is important, really, because what we've done, what COVID has done, is literally wiped off the map all of the growth since about 2002 or 3 even, with very limited certainty the speed with which we might or might not be able to recover. And I have to ask, what has this tiny little microbe taught us? I may not like COVID-19, I don't think anybody does, but I certainly do respect it. it's been far more effective at getting many of us to think and reflect and change our values and priorities than any number of PowerPoint presentations from the likes of people like me could ever achieve. The good news, however, is that it has increased demand for fresh thinking. And I think that's why this interest in regenerative tourism and regeneration in general has catapulted almost from relative obscurity a few years ago to being almost on every agenda in tourism at the moment. But I feel somewhat of a personal challenge. Despite all my speaking, I still get nervous about these things. And my challenge is that here I am. I just thought I'd show you. I'm sitting in this very old cottage in England. That's my office. I'm sitting right there. This is me. And as you can see, I'm English. I'm an elder. I don't like older. I like elder. It sounds better. I'm white. I'm middle class. I've had a very classic science-based education. I've had 50 years in tourism. And why would that make me nervous talking about it to you? Because to me, I'm thinking and speaking about regeneration, but Hawaiians and the rest of Polynesia have been living it for many, many, many years, centuries, in fact. And there's a reason why there is an RE in the word regeneration. We're not talking about generation. We're talking about appearing to do something again. I think it's all about remembering. That's a beautiful word that has so many different levels of meaning. I'm remembering some time I did have in Hawaii. It's about 40 years ago. Hence the book that is my Christmas present to myself, sitting on my coffee table in my living room, in front of a fire, of course, because it's pretty chilly out there. But regeneration is about remembering how we could live on this planet harmoniously with each other, with the natural world. Indigenous people throughout the world have not forgotten. And it was Indigenous people in Western Canada that really got me thinking in this way. And then I've had the good fortune to travel in different countries and meet people from different parts of the world. And I'm really a great proponent. So in Hawaii, I feel that you already have such a body of knowledge and wisdom. What I'm going to do today is just try and present it from a Western European perspective as how we are finally waking up, in a sense, to that knowledge. And because of our science has finally caught up with that knowledge. So first of all, I'll bust some myths. Regeneration, despite its use, is not a trendy buzzword. It isn't new. It's far more than sort of sustainability on steroids or sustainability hyped up or anything like that, although it is vitally important that sustainable practices and the work of organizations like yours are absolutely vital. We do have to significantly almost eliminate our biophysical footprint, if you like. But what regeneration does do is it almost includes that and transcends it. Many people have just dismissed it as another buzzword and that it's just about doing more good. And there's no doubt either that within the regenerative framework or model, it will do more good. It will have a positive net benefit. But it isn't just simply the idea that one could continue with business as usual and try and be a little bit more positive to contribute maybe to the local community or something like that. But that is all you need to do. In other words, business as usual. And certainly it's not about making incremental improvements. What regeneration is not a noun. It's not a thing, but most importantly, it is a verb. And this, I think, is most people can understand regeneration when you actually go back to the verb. It is an action. It's the dictionary definition is that it gives us new life and new energy. It enables us to revitalize some system, if you like, that was beginning to flag, was beginning to show some flaws, was not being as effective. It could be a human body that was beginning to get sick. Regeneration is a form of healing. Another aspect of regeneration is it's about realizing potential. This is a hallmark of regeneration, is when we understand that within each of us is a unique essence, a unique potential that we're here on this planet to actually express and grow and realize. And then finally, to me, the most powerful expression of what regeneration is to create the fertile conditions for life to thrive. Another way of putting it is from Lynn Margulis. She was a famous ecologist, and she said that the life force is, life on Earth is actually more like a verb too. It repairs and it maintains, it recreates and outdoes itself. So in sense, regeneration and life are one and the same, which is pretty powerful when you think about it. It's certainly shaped, informed by the natural world and the rules of the natural world, and hence the indigenous wisdom, which has been protecting that knowledge for many, many centuries. But as importantly, it involves for the Western mind, particularly, a completely new way, a new pattern of thinking. This is a lot harder than most people realize, but it can be done. And when it's done, so much else will change. Simply put, it's a journey away from business as usual to business as it could be. I like this diagram, this picture, because here we have these 4 intrepid travelers determined to find a new world, not realizing that they may actually have to do a descent before they can get to the other side of this cavern that separates them. Now, I've only got 20 minutes, and I'm going to try very hard to stay on time. So what I have done is I've put, I think it's going in the chat, but if you see, this is a Vimeo of a longer presentation that I did a while back that you can all watch. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long, and it also has presentations from Bill Reed. So I'm just wanted to do something a little bit different tonight and take the discussion just a little further. So what are the features that make regeneration so very different from sustainability, for example? It really does involve that we actually change the way we see the world, the way we understand how it works, and how we understand how we relate to one another as well as to the natural world. Because as Einstein said, unless we change our consciousness and begin to think the way that nature thinks, then we're not going to get out of the difficulties that we have at the moment. The Western world has really based all of its industrial expansion and so on thinking that is scientific thinking that, to put it bluntly, is about 300 years out of date. We've based it on what we call a machine model, an understanding of everything as operating like a machine. That's how we like to reduce it to its parts, to take it apart, to fix it, put it back together again, and so on. But the last science, ever since I would say in the last 100 years, has shown without any doubt that this is not an accurate view of the world anymore. We live on a living system. We are part of that living system. And we're having to operate according to nature's rules, not the rules, if you like, of Newtonian physics. We tend to look at everything in life through a lens that says we can reduce it to its specific parts, and we focus on the part. We can take something apart because things are apart. We're separate from each other. Whereas once we start working with a living system and we try to dissect it and take it apart, well, you know the end result of that. We kill it. So we cannot do that. So regenerative thinking is based on nature's design principles. And nature is now our very best teacher. And the reason I've showed this picture is, again, the sign of just how efficient nature is. These are 7 hexagons, that's right. Nature loves patterns, and it likes to repeat patterns over and over again in the most amazing variety of ways. Similarly with her, and I'm going to use that prefix, with her design, her rules, I should say, the rules and her principles, they're relatively few. They just get repeated over and over again. They can be implied over and over again. They can be applied, for example, to the individual. They can be applied and used by the enterprise, the business, the organization. They can be applied to the community, to the destination, to the country, to the economy, to the healthcare system, to the education system, because all of these are living systems. We are living systems. I have a body made up like you do of something in the order of 70 trillion cells, maybe 100 trillion. They still haven't come out with exactly how many. I can't figure out how they count them, but there are an equal number of bacteria, apparently. Each of those are systems in our bodies, in our systems, systems within systems. So what we're going to do today is just have a look at 6 major features of what I consider regenerative tourism. So I'm going over it very lightly and very quickly, but I wanted to give you some kind of a map. I haven't done this before as specifically, but if you can see in the middle of this hexagon of hexagons, we have nature and life and nature's principles. And then I've identified, and I've pulled from all this reading and stuff, 6 major features that we could start to work on in tourism immediately. Now, I'm not going to have time today to tell you how to do it. And in fact, I would never want to. The whole idea behind regeneration is that we understand the principles at stake. And once we really start to internalize and live them, and I think in Hawaii, you're very, very fortunate because, again, you're immersed in the earth wisdom of the Hawaiian culture, which actually, the more I read, it's perfectly matched. It's as if Western science has just woken up to the wisdom that was there. So you're very fortunate living where you are. The first one really is that we must begin to change our focus away from parts and bits, if you like, to the relationships between those parts that make up wholes within wholes within wholes, if you follow me. As I said, our body is not a collection of bits, but a communion of subjects. Tourism is not an industry in the sense there are all these boxes that we can like to conveniently put things in. We separate accommodation from transport and attractions and events, etc. We often see a destination, whether we admit it or not, as a conveyor belt. People fly in, they get carried somewhere, they're able to sleep somewhere, we feed them, we water them, we entertain them, we hope they have a good time, and then we send them home, kind of like along a mechanical conveyor belt. But the reality is that it's much more complicated, interconnected adaptive network. We can't reduce it to separate parts and understand it. So our whole frame, the whole way we look, let's say you're looking at an island, you're looking at a very complex system. You can't really draw a hard boundary between where tourism stops and something else begins. The second feature is that, going back to this notion of wholes, every part of every aspect, everything is a system within a system within a system, which means we're all interdependent. My thoughts, my actions obviously affect my family, but they also affect the workplace, they affect the community, the region, and so on. And if COVID did anything, it just showed you that just how interdependent we are. Regeneration requires that we look at our purpose. Most tourism is based on this idea that we must grow GDP. I'm just looking for my clock to make sure I'm reasonably on time here. That we increase the number of visitors because they spend more and they contribute to the GDP, and so on and so on and so on. And we have assumed that if next year we have more people than we had last year, then we're very successful. That is our definition, or has been our definition of success. Now, I'm not saying for a second that we don't have to have growth again in order to put life and fuel and energy back into the businesses that have languished so much in the last few months. But I am arguing that even despite that, we should not be focusing on just the numbers and the gross spending. What we really need to be focusing on is on the net spending. Because in nature, nothing does grow forever. It just doesn't happen. There are sometimes cells in a body that go rogue and decide they can just grow. They can just keep on expanding regardless of the cost. We know what kind of cells they are and how much damage they cause. They ultimately can destroy the host. In nature, nature doesn't maximize one variable, for example. It optimizes variables. So again, once we learn how nature works, we can start to look at our purpose differently. Here, for example, I have an oak tree right outside my window. It produces thousands and thousands of acorns. Each one is individual. Each one has an essence. Each one has potential, and each one is going to grow into a different shaped tree under different circumstances. But its objective is not to keep on growing forever, bigger and bigger and bigger. The tree outside my window is about 300 years old. If it had grown vertically in that time, I couldn't see it all out of my window, obviously. It's going to be mammoth. What it does do, at some point, it starts to stop growing outwards and it starts to develop more complexity, more variety, and it creates a habitat for more and more life. So the purpose of life is to create the conditions for other life to thrive. Wouldn't it be interesting if we looked at tourism in that light and said, what can tourism do to help life survive? So what I've been doing is I've been working with destinations, and we're looking at them more as ecosystems. We're looking at all of the research coming out of our understanding of how forests work, for example, and what is considered to be successful in an ecological sense. And these are, I'm sorry I have to go so fast, but these are all characteristics of a successful living system in the natural world. It's self-organizing. What that means is every single system within the system is doing what it needs to do to look after itself. But, and this is the key thing, it's making a contribution to the health of the whole. It's creating the conditions for the whole to be healthy. It's constantly having to adapt. It's never static. It's always learning. It's always achieving some degree of balance with the world around it and the world inside it. It's productive. Look at nature. It's phenomenally abundant, left to its own devices. It's very efficient. There is no such thing as waste in the natural world, and so on and so on. All of these are characteristics of flourishing or thriving. Again, all I can do today is ask you to take these thoughts back, maybe over the holidays, just as you go around the island, because they're so, you see these lessons, if you like, in front of you, if we just take the time and have the eyes to see them. But then start to say, well, how could we create a tourism economy, a visitor economy, a system which does the same thing and doesn't leave waste and wreckage behind? So in human terms, I think the questions that some of the destinations nowadays are starting to ask is, how can we create a sustainable visitor economy that tangibly enables every resident, like this young man, every small business operator, like the couple on the bottom left, the community, that's a place called Hamilton in New Zealand, where I've been working. How can we devise a system that is contributing? In New Zealand, what we've been asked to do with the task force, for example, is to really look at the entire system and say, how can it contribute to what they consider to be the four capitals: human capital, natural, social, cultural, and financial. It's been a fascinating lens to apply to the role that tourism can play. So if you take away anything from this very rapid presentation, it is that regeneration is about developing capability. It's the capability of every part of that system to self-organize, to thrive and evolve. Within that, there are lots of ways you can do that, of course, but having that focus is very different to just getting bigger. It has an impact on our role, because I would argue under the industrial production system, we've had to be we are an extractive industry. As I said, we have a conveyor belt that's designed to extract wealth from visitors that's left behind, and the traveler goes home. Now we're being asked to become more like gardeners or stewards in our destination, to take care of it more intelligently and more creatively. So it's a very different role. And that's what happens when you start to ask the question, how can we make those kind of contributions? I love this diagram because in a sense, it shows the old way of seeing our role, the very egotistical human beings, superior, on top, being able to use animals and plants and whatever in the way they thought they wanted it to do, to a much more ecological perspective, where the human being is sort of embedded a little bit more in nature, seeing that we are nature. That's a step in the right direction. And then this notion of savor, which is really about service, where we realize that our role, actually, when you look at our role as human beings, the role that indigenous people have been playing for thousands of years is one of service. It's one of protection. It's one of taking care. So very quickly around this hexagon dance of mine, if you like, people obviously figure very prominently in this model. We have, I think, woefully underestimated on people's potential, and that's a key part of regeneration, is to really see the whole person, their body, mind, spirit, and soul, and to develop their capability, so that we're not just utilizing a specific feature or task or whatever that may be. That it's much more of a co-development situation. And it's not just about people individually, but what another absolutely vital part is understanding that in this, now we see ourselves as an integral part of a much more complex adaptive system. We can't act for ourselves alone. We must contribute to the well-being of the whole. Community is vital. Now, you may have heard of regenerative agriculture, and I know there's lots of great practices, again, in Hawaii, where we're recognizing that unless you take care of the soil, then you cannot grow food. Farmers think they grow food, but the wise farmer knows that he actually nurtures and stewards and cares for the soil, because it is the soil that actually helps those plants grow and flourish and produce. I would argue that community is to regenerative tourism what soil is to regenerative agriculture. And for so long under the industrial model, we had a very top-down situation where a lot of decisions were not based in the community, and where certain interests, as companies got bigger and bigger, could make decisions that affected the lives of people hundreds of miles away. So people is important, and the next key aspect of this is honoring the sacred difference of every single place. This is so important in tourism, because again, the industrial model tended to standardize. So if a company had a great idea for a coffee experience, then when that became successful, the obvious thing was to scale it up and have thousands of these outlets all over the world, regardless of the setting in which they were located, regardless of whether they fit, regardless of whether they reflected the values and the nature of the place. So much of regeneration is going back to understanding what makes this place the place it is, what makes it so different, what makes it tick. And the very act of discovering that builds community. So I took this picture. I was fascinated with some of the beautiful places that you have in Kauai this morning, but that you can tell that this is distinctly Hawaii. There's no doubt about where that is. And the last piece, and I've only got 2 more slides. If Chris, you're having a bit worried, I think I'm just about in my time frame. I hope I am anyway. Is that I ask people to really think about, in this tourism system, if you like, where what we want is reciprocally beneficial relationships to occur between the guest and the host. Where is the value? Where is the real value in tourism generated? And it needs to be value, as I say, for both parties. And it is in that essential encounter between those two parties. That's where the value is. So the more holistically we look at the people as having, so many different aspects to themselves, the more we're related to the place, the more we can enrich and enchant our visitor, the more we can help them see with fresh eyes that they're are experiencing something they've never experienced before, the more meaning and character we can give to their connection, the richer the experience, the more meaning it has, the deeper the encounter, the more benefits inevitably arise. I thought I'd share, this was one of my most memorable encounters, was in Namibia a few years ago. But that's what we're really aiming for. So I've given you a really, really rapid overview of the seven features, if you like, the sense of life in the middle of it, nature in the middle of it, and areas that we can start to explore. There's a lot more to come. It's going to take a lot of work. The reason I was so excited to come here and talk was not to tell you about regeneration as if this was the way it is, but to ask really if we could explore together the connections with your own philosophies and ways of seeing the world in Hawaii. Because the little research I've done suggests that there's a beautiful match. And I've just spent the last several months really working in New Zealand and really getting to know and understand the Maori perspective, and obviously also being Polynesian. So I really want to support and share the vision that you could be a huge regenerative force in the entire Pacific as you go forward. So we're looking at developing, we are in fact developing programs right now for destinations, for communities to understand this in more depth. After Christmas, we'll be launching this website, which is the source, if you like. It's like an encyclopedia of information on regeneration. So you won't lack for information, I'm afraid. And then today, or yesterday rather, we're working with regenerativetravel.com, which is an American-based organization who've just launched a very good white paper on regenerative principles for hospitality. So I hope this has given you a very quick introduction and has been helpful. And mahalo, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was fantastic. And so many of the lessons that you shared with us and some of those ideas, I think we're really going to be able to expand upon with our next few speakers. So it's really insightful. We are going to save all question and answers for the end after all the speakers. So for everyone else that's in attendance right now, please do add your questions into our Q&A box. We'll be happy to, again, to kind of put them all together and have some great questions at the end. We also are going to post one more poll right now to get everyone back and engaged. It should be popping up your screen in just a minute or two here. So if you wouldn't mind just answering that one, it's about who do you think should lead the push for regenerative tourism in Hawaii? Is it the community? Is it the government? Is it business? Who do you think ultimately that should shoulder that burden? We know it's everyone is the answer to a certain extent, but to a certain extent, you also need some leadership. And where should that come from? So. And then, of course, I do want to remind everyone, we do have our donation page. Again, it's our 25th anniversary next year. We've set that ambitious goal of $25,000 to help support some of the work that we do. Just took a quick peek. It looks like we're up to about $550. So thank you to everyone who's started donating. We really are appreciative of that. And now I'm going to transition to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Joel Guy. He's the executive director for the Hanalei Initiative. He's here to share a little bit about the project and that program, but he wanted me to first share a video that they produced. I think it should, we've queued this up. We're hoping that it plays nice and clean and easy. So bear with me, but this is a beautiful video. So here we go.
E poha kua ka wai ka ie a po ka e na I na pali te to e lo lai o le hua o ie
Wainiha, Ha'ena, Napali, place names from the North Shore of the oldest inhabited Hawaiian island, where lohi have been tended for more than 10 centuries. Where native plants and wildlife thrive, where hula was born, where the mountains rise dramatically from the sea. Blessed with stunning natural beauty, abundant resources, Kauai's North Shore has supported countless generations, and it has attracted visitors in ever-increasing numbers. By the close of the 20th century, the North Shore was no longer in balance. Too many people were loving Hāʻena and Napali to death, threatening the very qualities that make the North Shore so special. Cars everywhere, trails trampled, fisheries depleted. Hearing the cries from the Aina, the community, government, and visitor industry came together to try and solve these problems. Plans were developed to transform Hāʻena State Park and transportation on the North Shore. A new vision to manage rather than promote tourism emerged. Without dedicated funding, it was anticipated that implementation might take years, if not decades. A way forward was not clear. And then it happened. With change desperately needed, nature stepped in, and in just 24 hours, the North Shore was isolated from the rest of the island. The rain started on April 14, 2018, and fell with an intensity never before experienced in Hawaii or the United States. When the deluge stopped the next day, over 50 inches of rain had fallen. Kuhi'o Highway, the only land connection for the North Shore, was covered by more than 24 landslides. Homes were flooded, cars and crops destroyed, but thankfully, no lives were lost. For some, it was a disaster. For others, it was a blessing. For over 1 year, the highway remained closed, giving the Aina and the people a chance to breathe again. And during this year-long respite, things began to slowly recover. Turtles and monk seals found refuge on the sandy shores, no longer dominated by people and the smell of sunscreen. And neighbors helped each other recover their homes and their farms. Kids on bikes and families with strollers reclaimed the streets, once buzzing with a constant stream of cars. During this time of healing and regeneration, the vision of past plans became more than a dream. Suddenly, there was both the political will and funding to move quickly. Much of Hāʻena State Park Master Plan was implemented. A North Shore shuttle became operational. No parking zones were established, and enforcement was stepped up. New legislation supported these efforts. And now, built on the foundations laid before the rains, a new chapter has begun for Wainiha, Hāʻena, and Napali. Can we be better stewards of the North Shore's precious resources? Can we find balance and perpetuate culture? Can we welcome visitors with aloha while limiting their numbers? This new journey has just started, and only time will tell. Disaster or blessing? Perhaps the rain was both, and in its passing, an unprecedented opportunity to work together in new ways for the future. Now let us apply what we've learned to propel us forward without a disaster. This experience of community, government, and the visitor industry working together, nonprofits arising to serve, is a model for the entire state. E lau hoi mai na wa'a, I ke ka, I ka hoi, I ka hoi, I ke ka, pai aku, I ka aina. Everybody paddle the canoes together. Bail and paddle and bail, and the shore will be reached.
Wow, that is a beautiful video and a fantastic story. Joel, if you wouldn't mind unmuting your video and joining us, I'll let you share a little bit about the program and the project, and I'll just turn the floor over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to see that video again. Yeah, truly grateful to be a part of this presentation. Anna, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Really, there's a lot of things in there that just really were resonating with what we've been looking at, and just so much valuable. I was just madly taking notes here, so I look forward to asking you some questions later. Yeah, watching that video did bring a lot of memories back, and it was just truly an incredible experience to be a part of such a collaborative effort with so many great people out here. I think most of you recognize Chipper Wickman's voice on that video. He was able to write that and narrate it. We were doing a presentation on Maui for a planners convention, and so we kind of built that video to kind of try to get that what had happened down. I think I have about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to try and almost sequentially run back through what we went through out here, and then hopefully bring you up to today. And then if there's questions moving forward, we can talk about those later. Once again, thank you so much for having me on here. And it's truly an honor, and I'm very grateful to be a part of this. As much as I'm really grateful to be a part of what that video was about. You know, I was listening to you talk about regenerative tourism. First of all, the poll question, for us, it would be community. 100% would lead that discussion and lead that effort. We feel very strongly that there's a huge role in government. Our philosophy at the Hanalei Initiative is community-led, government-supported. And then obviously, you need everybody else, the private sector and everyone else, to make these efforts happen. But we find that community-led has the most, yields the most benefit. So in the regenerative tourism model, we find it to be really applicable in community-based economic development. That's something that we're always striving to provide here and to produce within our community out here on the North Shore. Most of you have probably been out to Hanalei. I think there's a lot. I think I saw about 50 people from Kauai on the call. I'm trying to figure out who those were, so I know my audience. But that whole master planning process started, well, I mean, the impact started decades ago when you saw this kind of unmanaged visitor industry completely kind of run out of control within Hyannis State Park. And so the community got together, and through leadership of Auntie Kalahua, Chipper Wickman, Uncle Tommy Hashimoto, you know, so many great elders and just lineal descendants of this area got together and really started looking at creating a master plan for that area to try and manage this impact of visitors. And to do that, we made sure, and we were fortunate to have all great stakeholders and partners at the table. State Parks was amazing through the leadership of Alan Carpenter to kind of allow this process to happen, right? Because to create a master plan, it was unique in its kind. There wasn't anything done like that, from my understanding, in an area. So to have State Parks work with the visitor industry and really create this master planning process was exciting. It was going on for a decade. At the time, I was the president of the Hanalei Community Association, so we got pulled in as a stakeholder, and was really excited to be a part of that process. But it was one of those things where it's like, okay, we got the plan done and we can see the value of it, but how will it ever be implemented? What we're trying to do is reduce the numbers of visitors on a daily count from anywhere from about 2,500 to 3,000 a day down to 900 was what the call was. And so we wanted that to be through a reservation system. We wanted a shuttle implementation. And so, you know, how do you do that? And I think Alan Carpenter once said that it was much easier to, sorry, someone outside my window. You know, it's tough to go from 3,000 a day down to 900. And so what happened with the rain, we went from 3,000 down to 0. There was like, you know, 2 horses and a dog out there, and like nothing but residents for a year. And hopefully some of you got to experience that. I always felt like that was such a special time out there. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Hyannis. I'd been out there my whole life. And so it reminded me of when I was a kid. And that was really part of that impetus of like, we need to do everything we can to preserve that. When you could see the natural resources starting to flourish and come back, it was really special. And I know it was a challenge to get out there because you had to be a resident, but I always kind of encourage everybody, like, we need to share this with more people so that they can support that on the other side. So experiencing that time was really special. And during that reprieve, as the video stated, State Parks was able to kind of organize and get their master plan in place, and to get the park ready and to create a parking lot of 100 spots. The department, let's see, who was it? HDOT put in no parking zones, and that was really incredible. Unfortunately, the fines at that point were $35 to park illegally, and there's illegally parking going all up and down the street. And so to change that fine structure, you needed legislation. So under the leadership of Nadine Nakamura, who's just been incredible asset to our community, was able to put legislation through to increase those fines from $35. And just a little background on that, that $35 went to the state general fund. So it was really challenging for our Kauai Police Department to head out and cite people when the funds, were essentially not even staying in the county. I'm sure that wasn't the motivation, but it just, they have a lot on their plate. So we were able to increase those fines to $200. And that was really, really valuable, obviously, to deter people from parking illegally. It says it on the sign. Within that legislation, $100 went to the county and $100 goes to the state. So it was a nice split. Once again, when the road was getting ready to open, we were fortunate or unfortunate that DOT kind of kept pushing out their opening date, right? They were always like, oh, it's open in 2 months. And then 2 months would go by, it's like, it'll be another 2 months. And so we're scrambling to try to get everything organized for this opening date. But we knew once we were opening, if there wasn't enforcement for those no parking zones, it would kind of all be for nothing. So that's where Hawaii Tourism Authority stepped up and put about $140,000. I could be wrong by a couple thousand, but committed that funding towards enforcement. So they were able to pay off-duty officers and doe care officers to manage that and to write citations. So you had that in place. You had the no parking signs in place. You had the park getting ready to be ready to manage these people, and then they needed a shuttle. And I guess that's where we came in. Not that we have any expertise in transportation, but we were able to really dig into that system and try to really bring in some partners within the county to help guide this process. And we put out an RFP and we contracted a shuttle company. And so I'll look at my notes here real quickly, but in that process, we really need to make sure you have the merchants of Hanalei being considered. You have the resorts in Princeville. So there was just countless meetings with those because those guys are kind of the feeders into this. And then you have the resorts around the island and how are they going to get into this new paradigm and this new way of entering this park through a reservation system. And it's a little confusing because you have a parking lot, then you have a shuttle, and you have entry only. So there's a lot of learning to happen in this industry that's been kind of left unmanaged for so long. So that was a ton of work. And fortunately, I'll just share a little bit of during that planning process, we probably had about 50% opposition from within the community of, just the fear of like these huge buses coming out into the community. And that was, my mom, who's been out there since I was a kid, was like, no, we don't want your big buses and cars. Like, how do you manage this, this big animal? And so you're like, come on, Mom, it's gonna be okay. Like, we're gonna try and, reduce the cars through reservation process and just kind of hoping it would work. And fortunately, when we did start, within a couple months, it seemed pretty clear that the number of cars had been reduced. We've counted about 35,000 cars not gone out there in the last 9 months. Well, we shut down in March for COVID, let me just update you, but from June till March, we moved about 70,000 people and reduced about 30 to 35,000 cars. So you could see that on a daily basis. And so that same 50% went down to like 5%. So it's 95%. We're like, wow, we're really grateful for the shuttle system. It definitely has reduced the impacts of vehicles. It's provided a lot of benefits to the visitor. We found that most visitors, I was at the shuttle parking lot most days, kind of managing the reservation system. It's a really nice layered system. You fill up these 25 passenger shuttles because that's all the bridges can handle. So the bridge capacity within these one-lane bridges keep your shuttles at a size that you have a kind of a nice transitional amount into the park. So you're only letting 20 to 24 people per half an hour time slot, rather than everybody coming at 9 o'clock and just hammering this area all day long. We found that 85% of them are hikers. So almost entirely, it's a lot of hiking. So every half an hour, you put in another 20 people on the trail. It really kind of reduces your impact from a just an all at one point effort. But we found that, we want to start with even a smaller shuttle. And right after we opened, people were out there like, you got bigger shuttles? We want more cars off the road by bigger shuttles. And so it was really exciting to be a part of that success. Yeah, I don't know how much time I have, but I do want to just share with you a couple things that happened that we didn't anticipate. We found that it was really incredible to have an opportunity to bring everybody together, all the visitor industry, at least, all the people that were coming to the island. Anna spoke a little bit about educating people as they come. And we found that shuttle was a great place to provide more value to the visitor by providing an onboard messaging. And so we had people like Mihana Vaughn and Devin Forrest really write this beautiful location-specific historical and current messaging. And so it was GPS triggered. So when you hit a certain place along this route, it would play, and it was voiced by local, kids and adults that live here, that have grown up here. The jobs that we created were amazing to see, kind of a displaced lineal descendants of the area now being a part of the solution by helping people get on the shuttle and share about what it was like for them as kids. There's this huge technical side of trying to make reservations and trying to get your QR code. And we really tried to stay away from that. We wanted to, you need to have that. We definitely had that in place, and we were really fortunate because we're really data driven, and we need to see the data to manage sustainably financially. But when it came to the on the ground, it was much more about, where are you? Here's people that are from the area. And if they have to tell you about something, you'd rather hear it from them, from people that, that were my kind of shaping me as a little child growing up, to have them be there. So that was really exciting, as well as that onboard messaging, and to have that kind of mechanism to share with the visitor industry that's not, we're a nonprofit, we're not motivated by anything else, but not that that's the only thing that motivates businesses, but it was easy for us to kind of put ourselves in a position to be like, this messaging is all about the area. We're really here to take care of this place. And how can we be agents for that change? How can we be ambassadors that help benefit the area through our onboard messaging, through our workforce, through our staff? And that's kind of, I think, something I'd love to kind of end on. I don't know, like I said, how much time I'm taking up. I was not as on it as Anna. I didn't start my timer. But I hope that kind of shared with you where we're at. Chris, how we doing on time?
No, that's great. And I think, we'll leave plenty of time at the end for some question and answer.
Yeah, because I could go on for hours about this stuff. It's been my life overwhelmingly, and I'd love to share more of how this can be implemented in certain areas. But I think from just a snapshot of what kind of we were going through and how we got here, I think that might be enough for people to digest.
Yeah, that's a fantastic overview. I think it's a great jumping off point. As the Sustainable Tourism Association of Hawaii is big advocates for tour operators. That's why we developed that certification program, because we believe that getting people onto some of these buses, sharing them about the place, being able to help mitigate some of the areas that everyone can go to and manage the flows of people, it's a healthier strategy than just letting everyone get in their cars and good luck. And so we really love that experience has been something that's been very positive for that community, and stuck with we'll get into a bunch of other things. I do really appreciate how you kind of had to explain it to your mom, and she was a resident of the community. I think if we all, a lot of these problems that we were facing, if we treated the people on the other side of the problem as if they were our mom, we'd probably get a lot further, because we're treating them with respect and kindness. And so that's something that I hope we can dive into a little bit. But Joel, I don't want to take up too much more time. I know we got one more speaker. So thank you for that, Joel. I'm going to slide into our next speaker. Before we do introduce our next speaker, I did want to just share the poll results from the last one. As you saw, they should just popped up on your screen. About 45% of the people think that government should be the one that leads it. Joel, I love that you talked about that community being on, and then business. So it's 34%. So actually, community fell the lowest on amongst those that here on the Zoom call. But that being said, I think there's something to be said about we all have an opportunity to learn, and that's why we have these moments to get together and share ideas and see what we're going with it. So thank you again for that. Again, friendly reminder to everyone, please go, if you've got it within your means, are able to send us to do some donating. We really do appreciate any donations that can happen. And we're gonna have one more poll pop up on your screen. It'll be our last poll. Again, we'll share the results afterwards, after our final presentation. And the final question is, what areas of regenerative tourism would you like for us, the Sustainable Tourism Association of Hawaii, to focus on in the next upcoming year? We want to make sure that we're doing the work of the community in which we operate. So this will give us some nice feedback. And so with that, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Kalani Kaʻanāʻanā, the Director of Hawaiian Cultural Affairs and Natural Resources for the Hawaii Tourism Authority, to give us a little bit of insight on their side of the story and some of the challenges that you folks faced. Obviously, you guys have done a lot of funding of a lot of great projects, but obviously funding in tourism is all in a much different place right now. So love to hear from you and have you expand on all that. Thank you, Kalani, for being here. Aloha.
Aloha, Chris. Thanks so much for having us today. I'm Kalani Kaʻanāʻanā, Director of Hawaiian Cultural Affairs and Natural Resources at the Hawaii Tourism Authority. You guys timed that poll quite well. No pressure, no pressure at all. All kidding aside though, grateful to be with you all. I was looking through the list of attendees just before I jumped on to speak today, and I see so many familiar names on that list. And I think I have a few sort of key points I want to make today, but I also want to thank the other presenters for sharing their ike or their knowledge with us today. I really also just want to jumpstart my portion of this presentation today with this idea of co-creation. Yes, certainly government has a role to play, but by no means can we do it without the support of community and without the support of the business community as well. And so how do we create that P3, that public-private partnership? And I think Ha'ena and Ke'e was a perfect example where you had community-driven leadership driving a vision, empowered by government, right, and then supported by business. And so when you get those three sort of things together, they form this really, really strong triangle that help us accomplish, whatever our dreams are in the hardest of times. And so I just want to start with that. I also want to share that in January of 2020 this year, before all the chaos of the pandemic began, the Hawaii Tourism Authority Board of Directors adopted a new strategic plan. And at its core were 4 key pillars: the Hawaiian culture, natural resources, our community, and branding. And I think they aligned really well with what Anna was sharing. I think she had human, natural, social, cultural. I think I missed that last one as she clicked through the slides. But I thought that those pillars are sort of unchanging in my mind. That whatever challenge may come our way, over tourism, no tourism, and somewhere in between, we have to remain focused on the whole, like she said. And I think about this idea of reciprocation. We know he ali'i ka ʻaina he kaua ke kanaka, right? Land is chief and man its servant. We hear all these other olelo no ea or Hawaiian proverbs that teach us of our reciprocal relationship with land, because as we care for it, it cares for us. Aina, the word itself, actually means and can be broken down to mean that which literally feeds, right? And so we got to figure out how we do things differently. And I think one of the things that I would ask of each of you today, I see 81 attendees on the call today, 7 of us panelists. How do we live our values? Is the first message I have for us today. How do we live malama? How do we live aloha? We use those words quite a bit, but how do we actually implement those into our value systems and then put them into our actual practices? And I think things like the certification that Sustainable Tourism Association of Hawaii does, and the trainings and workshops, and then how those carry on through each of your businesses or your communities or your nonprofits or service organizations. How do we really embody those things? And really, I think not to be, I'm trying to find the right word. I don't mean to be cocky, but I do mean to say that these things are not unnatural to us. The idea of reciprocation when you live on an island is not something foreign to us. Our indigenous knowledge taught us a lot of things, and it's not only held by Native Hawaiians, but as we live here as island communities and here on island Earth, I think we have a really powerful opportunity to amplify and reciprocate those values that build toward the kind of vision of what I think regenerative tourism could be in Hawaii. I also want to encourage us to grow this community. Of the 80 of us on this call today, that's such a small percentage of the larger industry in Hawaii and also our larger community of 1.4 million people. And so how do we work to build those ties and strengthen that network of people who are like-minded like us? That's why we're here today. That's why we do the work we do. It's why we make the sacrifices we make in service of our home, its people, and its place. And so how do we grow this community and this network of people to do this work? Because it is really important. And we've been given an opportunity in the chaos and in the collapse of tourism to really reimagine and reset as opposed to restart. The last point I'd like to make is quite simply, only got us. And I think that's a powerful lesson. We have only ourselves to rely on. And I think that that's become more and more clear. We know our communities best. We know our homes best. We know the places that we enjoy. We know what we love to share and what we don't. And so if we know ourselves best, we just sort of have to trust our gut and trust in our na'au, those things that we know to be true. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but please know that the Hawaii Tourism Authority is committed to this strategy of 4 pillars of supporting and reinvesting in our natural resources, Hawaiian culture, community, and branding. And look forward to working with all of you. But I'm really curious to get to questions and answers today too. But thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about the work we're doing.
Thank you so much, Kalani, again for joining us, and again to the Hawaii Tourism Authority for all your support throughout the years. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. We've seen, I think I've worked with you folks through 3 different administration changes, and you know, what's been really nice is that I feel like it's continued on that path of really trying to do the right things, and that's really a testament to all the hardworking individuals over there. I know a lot of them have stayed through the different administrations and have kept putting their nose to the grindstone and working hard. So again, thanks to all of you. I do want to invite the panelists to go ahead and unmute their video and unmute their speakers. This is where we're going to kind of join in, have a little bit, hopefully a little bit of a healthy conversation, a little bit of a back and forth. This is the part we really wanted to get to. So Joel, Anna, if you two could unmute your videos and unmute your audio, please, for us.
I think my audio is unmuted, but it says the host has to start my video.
Oh, all right.
It's always just asked me to. There we go.
There we go. Perfect. All right. Now we got all of you. Okay, so we do have some questions in there that we've got ready set up for you. We will have probably a couple of our board members jumping in with questions as well. One question that came up that I think, oh, actually, shoot, forgot to talk about the poll results. So those just popped up on the screen. And so what areas of regenerative tourism should we be focusing on in the coming year? Environmental management is one. Community involvement is the one that's the highest. I'm impressed with that. Local food, transportation under 10%, but also policy changes at 32%. I do want to say we are an educational nonprofit 501c3, so we don't do lobbying. That isn't the role that we play in the industry. We do educating, but we can always educate legislators and things like that. But just it's always important to delineate what our role is in the sector. But first question for all of you, Anna, I'll send it your direction to start, but I hope we can kick it around to everyone. One thing that you talked about is maybe trying to move away from maybe just focusing strictly on GDP. But they say what gets measured gets managed. And so I think we're historically, particularly in the United States, a society that very values our metrics and chasing after growth and these things. Are there things that maybe we could measure or should be measuring to kind of keep us on the path of regenerative tourism? And what would be your recommendations in that regard?
Well, thanks for that question. Yeah, I understand this whole notion of measurement. It comes up time and time again. What I found interesting is that we've only been measuring what it's suited us to measure. We haven't been measuring all of the aspects of the cost. So we've managed the gross spending. We don't know necessarily how that, let's see it like rainwater in a forest. We don't know where it trickles to. So there are so many things that we could be measuring to get a more accurate picture of whether and where tourism was generating a net benefit. Now, there are some things which are qualitative in nature. If you have a community such as Hanalei, where people were suffering for many years with inundations of people, it was really probably upsetting their way of life. It may have been upsetting their ability to do other kinds of business, who knows? But did we measure that then? I cannot speak about that. I'll let Joel speak to that. But when, for example, for years, Venice was booming. but at the same time creating enormous costs to people. The local people were moving away, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, you know, it's one thing to say we have to have measurement, but I'm saying, could we start to be honest about the kind of measures that we've been, you know, using in the past? That may sound a bit harsh, but I think there's a lot of truth there.
No, Chris, if I could jump into, you know, one of the things that I think about often is how long do dollars earned from tourism stay in Hawaii? Right? As we move toward a more circular economy, how do we measure how many of those dollars actually are here and then how long they're here? We recognize they're always going to have leakage, but how long do we keep those dollars circulating as best we can is a new measure I think we need to incorporate. We measure per person per day spend and total expenditures and other things like RevPAR and ADR. But I think we don't then take it a step further to truly understand its impact, right? The entry we measure, but not necessarily how long it stays.
Now, I know that the HTA does do a little bit of research on community and their views of tourism. So I think that is a healthy measure. And that's something that I give you folks a lot of credit for, reporting good, bad, or indifferent, what that is typically at your annual meeting. So I think that's something that's important that we're doing.
Yeah, it's called the Resident Sentiment Survey. It's been done for the past 30 years, and it's available on our website.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, my comments were not specifically about Hawaii. They were generic to the industry in the world. You know, again, New Zealand has exactly the same challenge at the moment, realizing how little of the data they need to be regenerative, to manage regeneratively or even sustainably is missing.
Joel, just to see if you could touch on this at all, were there any measures that you folks looked at that have been proven to be helpful for the management of what you have that going on over there?
Yeah, traffic, too many cars. It just was overwhelmed with visitors, and I think Anna really nailed it. That you really seen a displaced community and people that used to go out and fish and do all these, you know, things that were just part of life were then completely being displaced over the decades. And so that was something that we could see clearly. You know, there was HDOT did some traffic measurements, and that's where we got about 3,500 cars were entering the area. I think it was like 6,000 times it was hitting those strips during a lot of the year. So that was 35, you know, away. But yeah, no, most of the measurements are also now, yeah.
Chris, could I just make one last question, last point? The fact that everyone always asks the measurement question, and that's always ultimately about economics and money, says a huge amount about the values that we live versus the values we often aspire to live to. Because if the only thing that matters is an economic return, and you're prepared to turn a blind eye to the things like the costs to a person living in a place unable to do what they, you know, is their right in many cases, then perhaps you've got a problem. And I think what the shift that we're experiencing right now, and the other thing I wanted to say about your situation, Joel, it sounded like COVID in microcosm. I mean,
Absolutely.
an act of nature sorted things out that wouldn't have, my question would be, would any of that have happened with anywhere near the speed and the investment of time and effort if the road had not been destroyed in such a dramatic way?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think you nailed it. And there's so many parallels with what COVID's done to what happened in that microcosm. I mean, like I said, Alan Carpenter always said it best, that it would be impossible to go from 3,000 down to 900, but to go from 0 up to 900 is a much more easier feat to do through a reservation system, through having all the players at the table. You know, someone texted me a little while ago asking me about, you know, how did you not let the community, I mean, how did you not let that just go back to business as usual, right? And I think that's where all those systems that were put in place to kind of control the amount of people coming in through reservations. And I think a lot of that comes with buy-in from the people at the table. Sukanoho from the KVB was just a huge advocate long before the flood knowing that the visitor industry was not happy out there as much as the residents were. I'm sure the comment cards weren't thrilled when they get yelled at by the local kids in the parking lot when they're trying to park their car at KA. Like, all that angst that was building up was affecting both sides. So we all knew there was we needed a solution, and you nailed it. The flood gave us that impetus to do it. And you know, Chipper always talks about the three-legged stool, where you have resources, you need money, you need political will, and then you need an engaged community. And it was an election year. We had some flood relief funds, and we had a, you know, I don't say angry community, but definitely a overwhelmed community that was ready to participate in the solution.
I love seeing the play between all of the different aspects and everyone's different thoughts that come into all of this. It's really insightful as to how this comes together. And it's interesting that, you know, I think, what was it, Machiavelli that said, don't let a great crisis go wasted.
Yeah.
And of course, he was talking about a crisis for your enemy, and maybe a little bit contextually slightly different than what we're saying. But this COVID crisis is giving us a really neat opportunity in Hawaii to really rethink tourism and really engage the community a little bit more about how it's going to come back and thrive. I do want to bring in one of our other board members. I think Chandra Birch from over at Holo Holo Charters on Kauai. Chandra, you want to ask a question to the team?
Sure, I'll start with a question from our audience, from Kusoki Fujikawa, excuse me, hopefully I got that close. What was the toughest challenge you have come across in 2020? And I'd like to pose that to each of the panelists, just briefly, whatever comes to mind first. Obviously, there's been incredible challenges throughout all of our lives, personally, professionally, in the community and statewide, internationally as well. Speaking on behalf of STAH, real quickly, I just want to say that, you know, for us coming together as an organization and figuring out how we can support our members who are primarily tour operators and obviously have been impacted dramatically from having revenues normal and suddenly cut off completely. So we had to change our strategy as well as an organization and discontinue, you know, our membership and fee structure, which is usually based upon our certification program. And we just, obviously people aren't operating, so we can't really recertify their operations and make sure they're doing it properly. So that's part of our donation efforts as well. And just a little reminder on that aspect that, you know, that was our main source of funding for a long time. So without that, we've had to reshift our focus as well. I'll start with Anna, please, if you could share what's been your challenge this year.
Well, I was in New Zealand when the lockdown started there, and my flights were all cancelled. So I had the terrible experience, she says, with a big smile on her face, of being quarantined with very lovely friends in just outside Auckland, right next to the Waitakere forest. And then I came home, and to be honest, I have not suffered, apart from a cessation of work, for a long time. But compared to so many other people, I've been safe, I've been healthy. So I have nothing really, I don't deserve any sympathy at all. I'm pleased in a way because, again, what COVID has done is it's got a lot of people to really seriously reflect and think that wouldn't have done as quickly before. It was booming, if you remember. We were growing internationally at 6 and 7%, and you don't want to sort of, as I think someone said in the financial crisis, you don't want to stop dancing till the party's over. So nature has an incredibly intelligent way of nudging to start, but will persist if we don't listen to what she has to say. Thank you for the chance to be with the conversation.
Thanks for sharing with us.
I'm suffering because I can't fly to Hawaii, but
yes. Joel, we'll go to you next, please.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Thank you for all that Holo Holo does. You guys are really leaders on the island. I always hear great stories and have been a part of a few of the efforts. So thank you guys for continuing to do what you do. Yeah, the biggest challenge, I mean, there's a few things there. The complete halt of visitor industry in Hanalei, you know, where this town has grown, 95% based on visitor industry. So it went from, as you said, a hustling, bustling little town to absolutely, a ghost town. And it's heartbreaking when you go outside and you see it just absolutely empty for days and days and weeks on end. And so, that's something that I don't think you can talk about this pandemic without really recognizing that those are our brothers and sisters that own these stores, that are working in these stores. It is one of the last places that has a lot of mom and pops. There's only maybe one or two kind of corporate companies that extract money, but the majority of them a lot of them are keeping money here. So that was really sad to see. And continues to be. I mean, then we get a little bit entitled because then 8 people showed up a couple weeks ago, tourists, and we're like, wait, what are you doing here? Like, but I think almost equally as important, it's and Anna spoke about it and everybody's mentioned it, is the opportunity to kind of reorganize what we're doing with the shuttle has been incredibly important, because we were starting to grow back to not, where bad habits become the norm, and because we started so rapidly and we were under the gun to get the shuttle going, and then you start going, and then the county was fortunate to grant us money to start the shuttle, but is that sustainable? Like, are you able to provide a sustainable shuttle system? And is this, community-based economic development, or are you just gonna start looking at some kind of subsidy and starting to scramble? So this has been incredibly valuable for us to all come back to the table, bring some of those stakeholders and say, look, what was our vision when we started that, when we created that master plan? Are we still on track? It's an adaptive plan. So, what changes do we have to make in order to make this sustainable? And fortunately, we have great leadership in Nadine Nakamura and Chipper and Alan guys, and there's some really smart people that are at the table. But I don't feel confident that would have happened without the pandemic stopping everything and having us really look at this system and say, where are the chinks in this operation, and how can we provide a more efficient system? Because that's going to be a much better experience for the visitor. I mean, we talk about how if your community is strong, then the visitor is going to enjoy his time in that community.
Thank you, Joel. Kalani, about your side of things?
Maybe 2 big ones for me. One was learning patience in sort of every way that you can imagine the word. Patience with others as they're responding and reacting to things, patience with yourself of wanting to sort of return to quote unquote normalcy. So patience and learning patience has been a really big one for me, and maybe not necessarily a challenge, but definitely a good inflection point. The other would be to sort of resist cynicism. There's a lot of chaos, right? And a lot of people that are unsure and uneasy and anxious. And so at those moments, I think the cohesiveness of our communities and networks and all of the systems that sort of exist come into play and become really clear. Everybody is working hopefully for the same thing that I think we all hold true, and it's our love for this place and each other. But sometimes we get distracted in the cynicism of it all. And so how do we really double down on compassion and forgiveness as we work toward those common goals? So those are our 2 big challenges, or for me, 2 big challenges.
Thank you for sharing. Our next question comes from Pauline Yang, and she'd like to share, grateful to be here, excited to be here. She recently graduated from the Travel Industry Management School for the University of Hawaii with an emphasis in hospitality and tourism. I'm currently working with the AmeriCorps as an Economic Revitalization Research Analyst in the Office of Economic Revitalization. She'd like to ask the panelists, how did everyone get into their field of work? A multiple part question, if you can touch on this as well. How do we measure the success of regenerative tourism, which everybody spoke with a little bit? And how may the city help leverage these efforts? She'd love to hear how we may be of support. So great question to get some engagement from different sectors. We'll start with Anna again, please.
Well, ladies first, is that the idea? Well, being as young as I am, I mean, my story about how I started is both vague and could be long. But I did. It was fortunate. I was doing a PhD in New Zealand. At least decided academia and I were probably not suited. But I came back to the UK. I'm with my fiance, and who was Canadian, and I had a period of time that I needed to get some temporary employment. So I ended up with a wonderful job like the one you have, Pauline, with, in that case, it was the English Tourist Board looking at subjects like agro-tourism, which was very, very new. So I had that on my resume for only about 3 or 4 months, and then to join my husband in Canada and British Columbia. And again, was just very fortunate. Luck plays a lot. The government had changed and was actually asking the question, do you think we could do anything with this thing called tourism? What's it all about? And because I had tourism on my resume, I started as a very junior researcher and basically spent the next 10, 20 years working with the industry as it grew up and became what it is today. So that's my story. Shall we share stories first and then deal with this tricky questions afterwards, or would you like the whole lot of one?
That'd be great. Let's pass to Joel. How did you get to where you are today?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. Yeah, I think as the president of our community association and with the flood, it really thrusted me into some kind of system improvements as we see, and how do we kind of go back to, how do we not go back to how it was before? And so at the time, there was a lot of great people within our community, like Mehana Vaughn and all these kind of leaders that were already in place that kind of just rose to the surface. Like we had talked about, you don't want to let a good disaster go to waste. And so everybody kind of came together. We broke down a lot of those walls that we saw out here over the years, where there was, you know, kind of there's a very wealthy kind of a billionaire crowd, there's an old Hawaiian crowd, there's government, there's community, there's hippies, there's environmentalists, there's kind of everybody in Hanalei, as you can imagine, on the North Shore. And so the flood broke it all down and allowed us to try to build some bridges. And I found that that was maybe a role that I enjoyed. I definitely seemed to gravitate towards that. And so then I had some history working with our legislator and wanted to put together a nonprofit to help facilitate some of those systems, to improve those systems. And the shuttle was a big one. So yeah, a guy in town said, look, I'll help put some seed money down so you can draw a living at this. And so it was just kind of community relationships that started this in 2018 for me, as far as the executive director of the Hanalei Initiative.
Thank you. Just shows how getting involved, sometimes you're thrust into places you didn't expect to be, and being willing and open to serve when it's called upon you. That's great. Thank you, Joel. How about you, Kalani?
So if we're referring to tourism specifically in my work at HTA, it's a bit comical, but absolutely true. I was working at Queen's Health Systems at the time in our Department of Native Hawaiian Health, and I got a cold call or message on LinkedIn from a headhunter that was doing recruitment for the position. And she's like, I think you'd be great for this position. You should apply. One thing led to another. I ended up on the phone with Kainoa Danes and my predecessor, Kaylee E. Wilson. And Kainoa, I see you on the call, so thanks for joining us today. And had a conversation with them about what they thought was best. And I ended up in the role after getting selected by our leadership team. So kind of by accident.
So just real quick to touch on part of her other question, you know, how do we measure this aspect of regenerative tourism? How can we ensure that the city can help leverage, you know, specifically she's asking in her type of position, but kind of in general, if you have any thoughts on how we can make those partnerships stronger.
Yeah, this measurement question again. Let's take Hanalei as an example. Because you've got basically Hawaii and microcosm there, really, haven't you? You've got a community, and so I like this thought of the concept of flourishing and thriving, because you can measure whether the ecology is thriving. There are lots of ecological measures for that. Okay. So I think, Joel, you mentioned that, you know, there was, you know, the wildlife was coming back. I don't know, but yes, you can measure the ecological side. That's not difficult. On the economic side, again, you can measure the income and where how much is staying. You can measure the costs and whether they're being paid for adequately. with a little bit more attention, you can certainly measure where it's going to. And I think as technology gets more and more sophisticated, they can measure virtually everything. And within a few years, we'll have some kind of equivalent to blockchain that everything is tracked. So that won't be as big a problem. On the human side, though, I think we've got to recognize that some things have to be measured through sort of proxies, you know. Yeah, resident sentiment is a good one. The turnover of people in a company. Bill Reed spoke very eloquently about the work that he did with Playa Viva, whose owner has founded regenerativetravel.com, because he put his energy as a hotelier into really making sure that people in the local community were involved in the project from day one, that the road didn't bypass this rather ugly village, but went right through it. So the whole byproduct of this has been a community revitalization. And what Bill said, which I thought was so telling, he said that the measure that he thought counted was the young people who had been going to the city came back. They came back to start families, to rebuild their homes, and that created this enormous sense of hope and family togetherness. Now, you know, how do you put that in an annual report? You know, 5 teenagers who would never have come back came back and, you know, stayed and blah, blah, blah. So I think we've got to have a much more humanistic approach. We've been completely brainwashed to think that the only thing that matters is money. It does. But when you see things, for example, like the Great Barrier Reef in Australia has got a price tag on it now. It is worth apparently 59 billion something. And as Charles Eisenstein, who's a great thinker, said, the biggest problem with that is, supposing somebody comes up with a way of destroying it that would bring in economic value of, let's say, 100 billion. Then you would have an economic justification for destroying the Great Barrier Reef. There is nothing about the Great Barrier Reef that can be put in those kind of numbers. You know, it's an integral part, even for our survival, but there is something about doing the right thing. And to me, rebuilding communities, giving people healthy lives, having a sense for the future are all the right things to do. And it's really sad if we feel we have to produce a bunch of numbers to make that case.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. Thank you. I think you did a great job of sharing Hanalei, actually. I just did what you said. I mean, the only part that I would want to just emphasize is that initially, you know, we saw this community after the flood return, you know, uncles that I hadn't seen in years coming back out and helping load boats when you're looking at supply distribution or evacuation. And, you know, these guys you hadn't seen forever, like old soccer coaches or whatever, were out helping out. And so that was really cool. And then we started the shuttle, and you saw this reduction at KA and a much more enjoyable visitor experience. But the people that visited from like the west side and the east side that hadn't been down here in literally decades, you know, you could see families coming back with fishing poles and their kids, and they would recognize the people that were working the shuttle stop and have this kind of like quick reunion. And they were just like, look, I wouldn't even go down there. The place was so hammered for so long, and to have them returning to these areas. And then it happened X10 after COVID because there was nobody. And so the parking lot was packed with residents, you know, full and black pot. So just returning to the beach parks, the whole island, coming back to these really special places was just immeasurable, yet incredibly just awesome to see.
Excellent. Very well said, both of you. Kalani, anything to add on that note?
I'll be honest, I lost the question somewhere in there. So if the question is collaboration with the city and county, I actually think Mayor Caldwell is having his last meeting with the visitor industry today. So we tend to have really close relationships from government to government standpoint. But I think to the larger point about measuring the success about regenerative tourism, I think I want to go back to Anna's point about the whole, right? If our measures are only measuring one part or one sector of the whole, then we're missing a vast majority of impact and cost. And I saw another question, I think later on in the Q&A, about measuring the cost of jet fuel, right? And importation of all the goods, food, and amenities that visitors want, right? There's a cost to that, and I think UH released a report on that as well. So I think for me, if we're truly going to transform the visitor industry toward a more regenerative one, we really have to measure the whole. And so we might look at things like extinction rates of native species, all these other metrics that exist and are out there. I see Hannah from Hawaii Green Growth and the Aloha Plus dashboard. Maybe we look at some of those measures and in a tourism section, or maybe just tourism represents one piece of the whole dashboard, but the dashboard is really our regenerative tourism dashboard as a whole. So I don't know, just kind of a stream of consciousness there.
Great.
I got to jump in for the sake of time. Thank you, Chandra, for running the Q&A portion for us, and thank you for all that insightful. There are definitely still some questions we didn't get to, some that I even really wanted to ask myself. So I promise we'll try to speak with the panelists, get their insight on some of those questions, and try to provide that afterwards. I'll just, in my master's program at HPU about sustainable development, one of the lessons I learned that really stuck with me is one of the most economically valuable things you can do is die, because there's a lot of money that changes hands when someone dies. You have to go create a funeral parlor, you got to go and buy flowers, but is that really what's the best thing for our society? Obviously not. So I found that that's just one of those things, as you speak to the idea of like, be careful what you measure, because you might end up with the wrong outcomes. I think that speaks to that lesson. So I just want to speak and say thank you so much again to all of our panelists today, Anna Pollock, Joel Guy, Kalani Kaʻanāʻanā. All of you have been fantastic. Again, big thank to Monty McComber for his wonderful start to today's events. I do want to invite the board that have jumped in. If you want to come on screen, I just want to let everyone have a quick look at everyone's face if you are still out there. Wave hello, say thank you. All of these folks have been working tireless behind the scenes to make this happen. You would be surprised at how difficult a Zoom conference really is to put together. We thought it would be much simpler than it was, and boy, it took a community to make this happen. So thank you to all of the board members. Thank you to everyone that made this happen. We have a lot to be proud of this year. For those that are looking for the next steps or some key takeaways, do keep an eye out on our social media platforms, on our website. We are going to be adding more to our Teachable platform. We're going to be, please follow us using the hashtag #TravelPono. And keep an eye out for some trainings from HTA early next year related to some of these things around regenerative tour, or around responsible tourism is probably the better way to say it. It has been my distinct honor and pleasure to be the MC of the events today. I hope it wasn't too painful for everyone out there in terms of putting up with this ugly mug. I also want to thank my cat for not jumping into the video as he's wont to do in all of these Zoom meetings. So, and so again, mahalo to everyone for being your participants. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you again to our panelists. And we look forward to 2021 and our 25th anniversary. Look forward to hearing from, look forward to a lot of information coming out from us next year. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you. Oh, sorry. One last poll question. See, I knew I had to mess something up before it was all said and done. Just one quick last question for those that are still with us. Are you likely to incorporate something that you learned in today's webinar? We just want to get that feedback. Was it meaningful? Was there some good stuff in there? Hopefully it was. And then that's something that we can report back to a little bit later. So before you jump off, please answer our poll question. And again, thank you all so much for all your time, energy, and joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to have everyone.
Thank you.
Well,
Great.
Aloha, everyone. Be well.
Thank you so much, guys.
Aloha.
Thank you, Anna.
Take care.
aloha.
Thank you so much, everyone.